Hey, it's Alan. I get asked all the time, how exactly does Kadima help people? There are three primary ways. One, we provide one-on-one personalized career coaching with a focus on getting you a great job. Two, we provide an online do-it-yourself course where you can work at your own pace. Three, if you have a job offer, we'll help you negotiate for more. So to find out about these great services and everything else that we offer at Kadima, sign up for our newsletter. Go to sickpodcast.com. That's SYCK podcast.com. I promise you, it'll be the best newsletter to accelerate your career. Thanks a lot.
Live from Brooklyn, welcome to the Sick Podcast, starring Alan Stein, where he steers your career with Kadima. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure of introducing a host that is about to embark on an epic series that's going to change the way you accelerate. And I have accelerate in quotations. Alan, is that accurate?
That is correct, Russ. We are ready to accelerate some careers. I'm so excited today to welcome Stacey Staaterman on the Sick Career Podcast. Stacey and I met through a mutual friend of mine, Emily. I knew her as Emily Lobel. Now she has a different last name. She put us in touch with each other. She was a friend of mine for the last couple decades. And she's like, you got to meet this woman, Stacey. I think you helped coach Emily. And she's like, she rocks. You should chat with her. You can learn a lot from her. And we chatted a couple of months ago, and Emily was correct. You do rock. I learned a lot from you, and I'm excited to continue to learn more. So let the Sick Career Podcast audience know who you are, Stacey, besides Emily's friend.
Thank you so much for having me. And Emily is a great connector. So I'm Stacey Staaterman. Great getting the name pronunciation correct for you. I'm a leadership coach, a career growth coach. I am passionate about helping people be better than the day before version of themselves. And so that has taken me to a couple of careers. My first career being in advertising and media, and my second career now in the world of coaching.
Nice. And I'm really excited to have you on here. And not only do we have the common bond of Emily, but we have the common bond of working at American Express, one of the top brands in the world. And I learned a lot there. I think you learned a lot there. Love to, and I want to talk a little bit about your journey at American Express, and because that was a big chunk of your career, right? Over a decade was spent at Amex.
Yes. I actually worked there 2 different times completely, but the last time I was there for 10 years. And I spent, I don't know, I think two years in an earlier time in my career. So it was an interesting journey and interesting enough that I came back for an even much longer time.
And you were a boomeranger as well there.
Yes.
So you were there and returned.
Yes.
And you were in the Amex publishing arm. I was in the finance credit card side of the business. But you're still in American Express on the publishing side. Talk a little bit about the space that you were in with American Express, what you were doing there.
So I worked in the publishing and media side of the business, which had been around for long before I got there, but many people did not know out in the marketplace and in the customer space I was working, as well as the consumer audiences that I would work with. They didn't even really know we were owned by American Express. So there was a little bit of we didn't quite fit with the rest of the company in a way, to the obvious, immediate eye anyway. The brands of American Express Publishing included at the time Travel and Leisure, Food and Wine, and Departures. The company has disbanded after a long time with American Express. But the reason that we were there was to work actually in concert with the other parts of the organization. But we functioned in a really, really different way. So it was a little bit like being a distant relative at times. And at the same time, we had the same quality of goals, the same high standard that you would expect from the American Express brand.
Yeah, and it was kind of like content marketing, old school with paper, rather before like with us, blogs and online social media and content like that.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, when the internet was born that year, whatever that was in the 90s, I was working at Travel and Leisure, and I remember we were, in this massive transition as a result of that, profound transformational thing in our culture. And I remember we would have meetings to learn about the World Wide Web and also the internet. Those were two distinct meetings that we had because we were all so new. We didn't know what we were doing. And I think that was true for every space. But it was a very interesting part of the American Express universe because so much about communication changed in the time that I was associated with the company and for the last 30 years, really. So to be in a place where communication was so central to the work itself was fascinating because we were also at times, categorically a bank. So we couldn't do all of the things that other media operations could do because we were actually part of a bank. So that was a very interesting time. A lot of challenges, being competitive with our peer set of companies at times. Clients sometimes didn't know what to do with us, but we also had incredible advantages because of the American Express backbone and the quality of the audience, the relationship level of the consumer set that we were all serving in our own way across a very diverse global organization. So a lot of fun, it's a lot of learning.
So, right, having Amex gave you good credibility working with brands and working with other organizations. But internally within American Express, how was the publishing arm seen versus some of the other, what I would call core areas of the business?
Oh, exactly like you'd guess. People, we weren't understood necessarily by, our own colleagues at times. Sometimes we would meet parts of American Express who didn't even know we were part of the same parent company. So we had to do a fair amount of internal education, which I think is true for any really large, complex organization. There's always a lot of internal communication between divisions. Ours got to be rather fun at times because I don't think there were too many divisions of American Express that got to invite people out for legitimate wine tastings the way we could. So we were certainly perceived as fun, interesting, representative of the card member. We represented the lifestyle of the card member, but we also did completely different things as businesses, and that sometimes was mind-boggling. And we didn't comparatively make the same profit or revenue levels on absolute dollar basis. So we were very, very small in this gigantic operation, but we also represented a lot of fun and interesting things that made us fun people to have around, and that was certainly something of an advantage at times. It wasn't difficult to get meetings per se because there was this expectation that we were going to be interesting to meet with, if nothing else.
Yeah. And internally, did people move around ever from the publishing side to the I guess credit card side, the finance side, or was that pretty rare?
It was somewhat rare. I would say our skill set translated best in the merchant support areas, because a lot of the work that my team in particular did on the media side was about client partnerships. So going out and striking a partnership between Travel and Leisure and Lexus Automotive, or going out and doing a project between Food and Wine and Hilton Hotels. So those kind of partnerships were akin to what you would experience in like the merchant services, merchant management area of American Express. So we probably did our most work, most collaboration across the companies between those two divisions. But there were definitely parts of the organization that the skill sets of the employees wouldn't be well aligned with what would have been required by certain other areas of American Express. I would say on a whole, we probably had like a lower concentration of people with MBAs, but we had a higher concentration of people with, mastery level credentials in the culinary world and could go work, at a restaurant at a moment if they had to. Granted, that was a relatively small part of our media team, but we had different skill sets and often would be called on to cross-pollinate more than join our family permanently, if you will.
Right. And you were there for over a decade, your second time back, and then you left and you did something like very different after you left American Express. Or talk about your transition, your post-Amex career.
Sure. So I would say to the outsider, meaning anyone outside my own head and heart and my family, the perception was Stacey just jumped off the top of the American Express tower and has no safety net. And, the reputation of American Express for at least the time I was there, maybe you echo this too, was this was a place you stayed forever, really didn't entertain leaving a whole lot. There wasn't, at least at that time, too many people that felt there was something else beyond the blue box. And so it was pretty unusual to certainly walk out without what other people perceived as something extremely compelling and obvious and, something with a guarantee that seemed to come with the quote unquote golden handcuffs or guarantees that one expects at a company like American Express. So it wasn't weird for me because I had quit, other places before and engineered exits before. I was working at Fast Company at one point and running all of marketing for that brand. And I absolutely did not like the job. It was not, it was at a time when that brand had very few points of friction in the marketplace in the ad sales world where I had expertise. And I found it very boring to work there. So I engineered my way out of American Express at the time when it was the most celebrated business publication, business brand in the media universe. Everyone thought I was nuts, and I was so relieved to leave because it just was totally boring to me and draining and not challenging enough. So I was sort of used to this idea of like, leave, I bet on myself, I can figure this out. I had a rough understanding what I wanted to do. And I also knew that if I didn't take a big leap, that I probably wouldn't work out enough of the details to actually do the thing I wanted to do next, which was to move into my own business as a coach. I did, though, full disclosure, simultaneously explore working in ad technology, which was an area that I had a lot of specialized expertise in at the time. And I had both of those tracks in full exploration when I was engineering my exit from American Express. So I didn't know when I was going to make any money again or anything like that, but I also knew that recover from, a misstep if in fact I was making a mistake.
Yeah. And as you were engineering your exit, I like that term. It sounds like you were considering two different paths, ad tech or your entrepreneurship and like running your own coaching business.
Yes.
And how did you decide to go at this fork in the road? You knew you were leaving Amex and you're going to go down one of these two paths. How did you evaluate those and think about those two different options?
So great question. First, I sort of thought not too deeply about it for probably 3 years. So I had this idea that I would not stay forever at American Express in the media group. And I was pretty certain I wasn't that interested in going somewhere else in the company, even though I had a great experience there and tremendous respect for the organization. So I sort of thought a little, but not a lot of doing for about 3 years. And then I remember very distinctly going to, global national sales meeting, it felt like the 1 millionth time I'd been in a room like that. And we had a keynote speaker, a digital futurist named Rashad Tabakawala. I had not been too familiar with him, but very early in his keynote, he said, "The future does not fit in the containers of the past." And I was like, I felt like he was talking directly to me. So I wrote that down, and I'm like, what am I doing here? Just like waiting for the container to change. I mean, to me, it just really spoke to this idea that, change is always happening, and to think that there's going to be some kind of, moment that it's just going to be the magical, perfect time to do something is ridiculous. And also to recognize that it's on all of us. It was on me to figure out this container issue. So I almost immediately hired a coach after that keynote, and I had worked with coaches before at other times when I was kind of at a professional crossroads, which always seemed to be the time that I would get my most anxious and think about making big dramatic changes. I tried to move away out of New York at one point, and anyway, realized that coaching was a very helpful way to sort through, my points of impasse. So I had always been interested in coaching because I was like, wow, this is seems like a cool job, and it really has helped me. But I hadn't really done much exploration of that as a standalone, thing I could do most of my time. I certainly did tons of coaching in my work as a people leader, and I was often tapped by people to help them think about whatever they were doing. So I really liked I liked coaching as a pursuit, but I wasn't really sure. And I was, the breadwinner in my household. I live in New Jersey, so I have, terrible taxes. So I had some things to consider on a variety of levels. So having that other thing that I was looking at, which was like a legitimate interest of mine, ad technology. I always worked in advertising. Ad tech was super brand new as a thing. There was so much growth going on at the time, and I had very, very specialized kind of experience working because I worked at American Express. I knew a lot about the value and impact that data can have on advertising and measuring advertising. So they were totally reasonable paths for me to explore, given my time of the last 10 years. Although they certainly seemed really different, but that sort of helped me, and even now when I work with people who are having career growth questions, I often will suggest, especially to people who have a lot of choice because they have a lot of breadth, or, they've done a variety of things, is sometimes it's good to have, different types. It's helpful to even deciding which one to lean into more fully. And that's exactly what happened with me. I would go to meet with ad tech companies and feel like throwing up in my mouth a little. I was like, I don't think this is going to work out, because I just physically am not having a great experience in thinking about being in this kind of environment. And it really helped me recognize that I wanted the freedom and control of my time, the control of what I was focusing on, and, a little less bureaucracy, fewer required corporate training sessions, and, some of the things that can be challenging of being in corporate life.
Yeah. And so as you got more intrigued in the coaching, I think you mentioned coaching people for career growth. I think you had mentioned that. What do you think is that a big area of focus with you and your clients in terms of helping to grow their careers? Like, is that a big focus of yours now, or the portion of your focus on helping people grow their careers?
It is. Although it's funny, I didn't set out to do this. What I set out to do is help people in certain industries. So I love the people of advertising. I love the people of media. I love the people of communications, journalism, entertainment. I also think, in general, those industry areas don't do a great job helping people think about their career paths. And I was always so surprised to meet so many really talented, awesome people in my corporate life who also felt like they had no choice, that they were trapped in whatever they were doing. And I personally just never felt that way. I mean, as being someone who quit jobs and didn't have full plans. And, when I told you the story of Fast Company, I took 6 months off and just went and saw friends and visited my grandmother and stuff like that. And that was a pretty bold thing to do, considering I had to pay for my own life and I didn't really know how I was going to do that. And I didn't have anybody who was going to come and bail me out. But I did have confidence that if push came to shove, I could get a job and find, a way to bring value and extract value from an organization. So I always had confidence in myself in that. But I also saw just repeatedly that there are so many people that don't understand they have the same choice. And that's that's astonishing to me even now. But I think it's a very prevalent thing, and maybe that's just kind of works for the industries, if you will, because people will say. Although now we're seeing, the confidence that people have in making bold choices, and I think it's super exciting.
So, as you work with people, or as you talk to people, as they're thinking about their choices in their career, and something that I always like to tell people and remind people is everybody's employed at will. Pretty much. Most people that I know are not under contract. And because of that, you can get fired at any time, but you can also leave at any time. It makes you a free agent, but it gives you a lot of opportunity, a lot of choice. How do you think about that? Like, you got to a certain point in your career at Amex and you were able to engineer a nice exit package, or like engineered your exit. I'm assuming there was a package there with
yes.
that. Not just like goodbye drinks, but something nice to get you started. How do you think, as everybody does have, everybody's a free agent.
100%.
What advice and guidance do you give people to like think through that? Because I find a lot of people are not fully aware of that. People get surprised sometimes when they get fired or laid off or displaced or reshaped, whatever the company wants to call the term. But everybody has an active choice to make as well in terms of their career.
Yes, no, 100%. And I love the way you put it. And I echo the same things. I think that part of my realization of that came through getting invited to leave a company one day with like 3 days notice. And it was shocking to me. I thought my good works would provide me a certain level of guaranteed employment, and it was not true. and it was shocking to me. And it was difficult to get through. It was a very tough emotional road. That's still, I can bring that feeling back if I really, really want to. But I think that the recognition that yes, tomorrow they could change their mind, the company could change direction, the product could change, and that might create a ripple effect in what is needed within a company. And that's something that we should have an expectation that it could go that way. But it's also, every day we show up, we're making a choice, a commitment. And if we don't want to make that commitment that day, we can choose something else. I'm not saying be reckless, and I'm sure you're not saying be reckless either. But on the other hand, people often get really wrapped up in stories in their own heads that aren't necessarily based on any fact or truth in any real meaningful way, that prevent them from doing something to change what they're unhappy about or whatever is not working. I worked with a client recently who really, really wanted to leave big organization, valued, but not taking her in the direction that she wanted to go. And she's like, we have a reduction in force coming up. And I said, great. Are you getting in line? And she said, why would I do that? I said, to control the situation. You want out, they're going to reduce people. Why don't you just volunteer? And so she volunteered, and she's getting the exit terms, that she wants and deserves. And it's great because now she's free to talk openly to other people who may be in a position to take her where she wants to go, and she can bring the value to them instead of staying in a place where, it's working okay, but it's not great.
Yeah. And And especially people that deal with RIFs, what companies call it,
Yeah.
risk reduction in force. The early on folks usually get the best severance as well. And some of the best talent are the ones that stay around the last because they're not the ones that are actively sought after to chop, to
Yes.
reduce in force. So usually the early ones are the obvious choices to reduce and they get the biggest payout. But
Yeah.
what you were telling this individual, it sounds like, is like raise your hand and get in line for that option.
Yeah. And she did. And, there were tricky points along the negotiating path and everything else, but it was interesting to, she's like, well, how do I figure out this information? I said, why don't you ask somebody that has gone through it before at your company? Has anyone else ever been? She's like, yes, but are they going to tell me? I said, I don't know, but if you ask them, then you'll find out. And sure enough, she got information that made a world of difference in activating some financial benefits that she will want because she's going to make a pivot and it may take a little while. And I'm always surprised, like some of the obvious things that people can do to, move in the direction they want to go. They're like, I can really ask people that. I said, yes, they can always just not give you an answer, but they will not be able to read your mind. So better to ask in a respectful, polite way. But
and that is some real sick advice that you can ask people, get advice from individuals, and the companies do not want you talking because then in this case, they probably had to give your client more benefits in some way because she found out that they're treating this other person like this. So she's like, I want that too. But you can get lots of insight about that. And I know people go to apps like Blind and Fishbowl, and the information has some stuff on there, Glassdoor. But you can ask real humans that are going through it. And worst that they say is no. And I find actually a lot of people are comfortable talking about things because they want to know how they stack up.
Yeah.
And it
is crazy. My other site that I like among the ones that you mentioned, levels.fyi.
Yeah,
so good.
FYI.
But the other sort of sick move that I think maybe I did myself and I try to pass on to other people is sometimes you need to show the people that are going to execute, the exit strategy that you want to see happen. You have to help them sell it through. So I did this myself when I was leaving, when I was negotiating an exit from a company. My hunch was that my boss was actually going to get the whack. And I looked at her situation and I saw that she was, much closer to retirement than I knew she had plans to move to another part of the country. I knew a lot about because we were close. So I went to her and I said, I feel as though there's some big shift happening around here. And I think it could impact you. And I might be wrong. And I'm not trying to create undue alarm. However, I think that you have an ability to do something to reinvigorate the team and reinvigorate the whatever and go to management and talk about restructuring. And here's what I would do. And she said, you're not on this org chart that I gave her a PowerPoint. And I said, no. I said, because I'm going to be the big, wowie change. You're going to get rid of my job and you're going to restructure this way. And here are all the advantages. This is a legit why I think it should happen. I do believe this provides you personally some security that I don't think you have right now. My opinion, I could be wrong. But if I read this is what I would think of doing. And I built, a set of pages of PowerPoint with org charts that drew out a transition plan. And I said, I think this is a good win for the next few years is what the business needs. And frankly, it's what I need because I don't really see a role or growth path for me here, but I'm never quitting. So what do you think? And she sold it. Yeah. And that was probably my best engineered exit.
Best. So you've had multiple.
I've done, it's not like a full-time job that I had doing this,
Yeah.
but it was, I always, me personally, I worked in high risk environments, places that had a lot of change. They were either very new or in the middle of reinvention. And I picked, I mean, it was partly what I didn't like about Fast Company. Fast Company was growth trajectory, no end in sight. For me, too boring. So I immediately went to something kind of messy after that, because I'm like, I like to clean up mess. I like to clean up mess. I like to build the new. I like to refresh the old. And so it was a great insight moment for me. But with those risky environments comes the potential to maybe exit. And I think that's a great lever that a lot of people just don't think about, in part because I think culturally, we've had this idea that you're supposed to go somewhere and stay as long as you can. And I mean, that's so out of date, especially given the last 2 years. We're not supposed to stay somewhere forever. It's just not, it doesn't happen anymore. My dad worked at IBM from his very first job out of college until he retired. And that will never happen again in our lifetime.
Right, but they also paid him a pension back then, right? Like,
yes. Yes.
So they do set you up. Like, so there was some loyalty. Like, there was some desire for loyalty there. Here, you're self-funding your 401k. You can take your 401k to the next company, and there's really, like, you can't take your health care, which is a pain in the ass from company to company. But so that does tie you to the company sometimes, or to a company that does provide some benefits.
Yes, and if I were being a little cynical about the whole thing, true enough, my father had a pension, but I'll tell you that my father was forced into retirement at 53, which is like crazy young, and he passed away at 55. And his health issues were, I'm sure, in part influenced by the fact that he was there probably 10 years longer than was healthy for him to be there. And I think that's the weight of the work you do is, we cannot measure success through progression of, whatever's in our 401ks and whatever's in our bank. It's way too limited. And it's just not the way we're supposed to look at life.
Totally agree. So how would you suggest people look at the success if it's not their 401k balance, which I agree with? How should they look at success in terms of the career side of the equation?
Well, I think it's first and foremost, start measuring earlier, the things that you want to have in your life. So one of the most powerful things I did with a coach at a crossroads moment about 25 years ago was to write down my life goals, which sounds like something super bullshitty. Like, who does that? I was like, I'm not doing that bullshitty, same with the gratitude journal and then those vision boards, all of which I deemed as waste of time stuff for hard charging corporate soldier that I was. I can tell you that in doing that exercise and writing down on one piece of paper what I wanted my relationships to look like, what I wanted my home, my body, mind, and spirit, how I wanted to spend my free time. Yes, I did write about my career, but I didn't write about money. Because money's a tool anyway. Money is, you burn it on a fire for warmth if it's cash, or you do something with it, and if you don't know what you're doing, why it's good, what's going to do for you, I don't know what the point is. Security comes up as maybe one answer that people sometimes hang on to, and I love security as much as anyone else. But that exercise, which I've written about a bunch in different things that I've done, I was in a men's health piece where I wrote about this. That's been transformative because it forced me to put stuff that was like rolling around in my head on a piece of paper, which got my brain more cohesively connected to it. And even though I wasn't actively, aggressively, religiously working on the vision that I wrote down, almost everything that I wrote all those years ago is absolutely on point, even though I've changed my career, even though at the time I didn't own a house, now I own a house. I didn't have a spouse, now I have a spouse. I didn't have children, now I have a child. None of that stuff was really in place, but I feel as though the blueprint still 100% holds, and it takes a lot of pressure off the, not pressure, but it takes it puts perspective around the role, income, earning, chasing the bigger salaries. You know, it doesn't always lead to the places people think it's going to take them, or it may take, you know, you in a direction that costs you a lot in areas you didn't expect.
Yeah, and I agree on not chasing the money, but something that I do believe in is to identify those goals, identify like what's important to you. So it could be work-life balance, it could be a company that you enjoy working for, it could be a work, it could be engaging work, it could be ability to grow. But then once you identify that, there's a bunch of different organizations that can provide that for you. You can do it on your own as an entrepreneur, or you can go to a variety of companies, and you can choose American Express, where the median compensation is $65,000, or you can choose Google, where the median compensation is $296,000. So if you're going to be doing the same thing and you have the same goals and desires, one thing that I tell people is like, don't chase the money. But if you're going to put in 40, 50 hours or whatever it is to an organization, you might as well get paid for it, so that then you can spend that time with your family, with your friends, and retire earlier. I'd love your thoughts on that.
No, totally. And I think it is about looking at, you know, what's going to get you the right kind of juice from the squeeze, you know, and absolutely looking at, if I'm going to spend 40 or 50 hours, you know, is it better to put the hustle in here, even if it's going to cost me a little more time? Yeah, that might be the right decision. But I'll share a story. There was a period of time when I had a pretty demanding full-time job. I was, you know, the usual expectations of that Monday to Friday with, you know, 10 or 11 hour days. And I also took on a side hustle. And the side hustle was very low workload, but very demanding time. So I had to spend every other weekend for 10 hours on a Monday, 10 hours on a Sunday. So every other weekend is basically obliterated from my available time to do anything in life. And I had to sit, and I was on call, and I was paid whether I did anything or I did nothing, but I couldn't leave. And I wasn't anywhere that I could like even watch TV or do something that you could argue as entertainment value. I had to like sit and wait. It was working in a newsroom environment.
And they didn't have cell phones then, where you could just surf your news.
There wasn't. And even if some of that stuff had been in place, it wasn't allowed, a lot of that. But it was also the things I wanted to do at that time, I literally couldn't do because I couldn't leave the room. And so what ended up happening was I did have this, you know, huge infusion of cash, because on an hourly rate, I was making so much more on my side hustle comparatively, right? But I also ended up spending excessively to fill in the blanks and get stuff done because I no longer had any time. So that year was great for Christmas gifts if you were on the receiving end for me, because I had 2 hours to do all of it. I had to spend in ways because I had no time. So I think it's, you know, at the end of the day, and this is, I think, your point as well, like looking at the cost benefit of whatever it is that you're doing. The only thing I wish I had done way back when, or earlier in my corporate career, was figure out how to have a side hustle entrepreneurial pursuit, because there's so many benefits to, if you're allowed to do that and you're not working in an organization that somehow prohibits you from doing that, to be able to benefit from some of the tax benefits and the other small business benefits that I now see as a person who's in that position. That's a winning combination, in my opinion, for, you know, the age we live in now. It's the hedge against getting laid off. It's the hedge against you just getting into some job and turns out it's not at all what they said, or the company said this is the mission, and then 3 months in they change the mission because something else happens. I mean, there's so much, you know, instability in the businesses themselves that the stabilizing has to be you taking control of what you want and having some things to kind of counter those ups and downs that didn't happen in my dad's era. Nothing changed much during that time my dad worked at IBM. Everything was roughly the same, compared to what we've been living through in the last, 20, 30 years.
Yeah. And you mentioned it a little bit, like it prevents you, like it protects you if you get laid off, but it also gives you more flexibility, like if you have a side hustle. Also, like your dad was at an IBM lifer. My dad was a lifer at a small bank called Arnold and Blythe Schroeder, and he was there for about 35 years or so and got laid off about the same age. I don't know exactly his age, but he's still alive, my dad. But because he never moved around, he was intimidated to move around after. And like he just never, even if he did a poor job of refreshing his resume, had not interviewed in like 3 decades, and he did not have his skills fresh, which made him more reliant on the whims of the company. And when his bank got bought out by a French bank and they decided to reduce staff, he was reduced. Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
So we're wrapping up on time here, Stacey, and you've given lots of great advice about how people can empower themselves and really enable them to grow their career. But my penultimate question for you, and penultimate is one of my favorite words. It was a good SAT word. It helped me. I think it was actually on my SAT.
Nice.
But my last question for you, what sort of sick advice do you have for our audience here in terms of folks that want to accelerate their career and be successful in their careers?
I think that what often happens is people have a somewhat incomplete story when they're out there talking about who they are and what they bring to the table. Most everyone knows, because it's drilled into us from a very early age, your skills, your knowledge, accomplishments. Everybody talks about that. That's always what's on a resume. But I think what people, especially now, need to understand is that hiring includes much more focus now on what motivates you and what your leadership behaviors are. And I think we do thank companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, who have systemized the interviewing process to pull more of that behavioral, situational perspective into the process of, finding talent and securing talent. And some of the, maybe excessive levels that they execute on, you could debate the merits of, but I think the getting to know what people are like when things get messy and what they do when things are less than optimal is the difference, these days. I mean, the pandemic has just shown us that the people we want on our teams are the people who can adapt to the things that seem insurmountable as problems. And that's why I love the communities that I work with so much, because that's what we collectively have been in the middle of for the last 25 or 30 years, as the media and marketing communication industries have been so disrupted. So I tell people really, really think about not only skills and knowledge, but also motivations and leadership behaviors. And now we've got other layers like, what's your history of creating a diverse and inclusive environment, on every spectrum of that meaning, as well as remote leadership. So we've got some things that I see people all the time leave a little out of their story, and all that stuff's got to be inclusive in the way that we're packaging ourselves.
Yeah, so focus on those behaviors and those leadership attributes that you have undertaken and kind of like market those, because that's what companies are seeking nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. And the very last question for you, Stacey, is you dropped great wisdom here. I'm sure a lot of people may want to reach out to you. How can people find you?
Well, the easiest place to find me and interact with me on a regular basis is LinkedIn all day long. Love LinkedIn, so much richness there. And that's an easy place to get to me. And I have, of course, a website, as you'd expect, www.staceystaaterman.com. Staaterman's tough to spell, so check the show notes or whatever so you can get the spelling correct. but I'm not too difficult to track down. I love connecting with people from all different industries. It's one of the great blessings of the work.
Great, Stacey. Well, thank you so much for joining me today on this Friday when we're recording it. And appreciate all your generosity with time. I'm glad our paths have crossed, and I look forward to continuing to work with you, partner with you, and get to know you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a great day. It's always fun chatting with you, Alan.
That wraps up another remarkable episode of the Sick Career Podcast with Alan Stein. Check out past episodes and other resources on the website. That's sickpodcast.com, and it's SYCK. Alan, tell the audience about the newsletter they can sign up for.
The newsletter rocks. Check out the Accelerator, XLR8R. You will get great tips about your career. You'll get honest insights. You'll get the occasional pet picture. And you will learn how to take proactive control and take charge of your career.
Very good. Very good. That's sickpodcast.com, SYCK. For your host, Alan Stein, I'm Russ Reba, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode. You are going to love the next one.